what Anthony Davis brings to the table when he is at his best, what LeBron James brings to the table when he's at his best, what Russell Westbrook brings to the table when he's at his best, you can't bring all of that to the table at the same time when it's one table. It's like a balanced meal. When you got your vegetables over here, you got your fruit, you got your grain, you got your meat and everything, it's maximized. But however, if you come to the table and you're like, all right, well, this aspect of the full course meal is more important, so I'm just going to overload my table with that, you don't have a well-balanced meal anymore. And then if you have aspects of your like health that are contingent upon the other pieces of a full balanced meal, then you're going to lack there. And inevitably, the person who has a full balanced meal is going to come out healthier. And I feel like teams function in the exact same way. I don't think that it was ever fair for us to consider the Lakers to be a championship caliber team while knowing that they don't fit. But if you just think about what we could have done with $44 million, we could have put so much around LeBron and AD, who that is enough of a championship core to where I don't think there should have been expectations that we would be better when we relinquish that in exchange for another superstar player who can't bring the best of himself to the table.
Got a lot of habits. Won't do a lot of laughing. Chewing shit.
So, the Lakers are a garbage fire. We all knew that, but that's not really what I want to talk about right now. What I want to talk about is, should we have expected this? I remember when they made the trade for Russ, there was a lot of confusion going on. Obviously, it's the Lakers, it's Russell Westbrook, it's LeBron James, it's Anthony Davis. It's a hot button topic. Everybody has an opinion. And I feel like a lot of people were worried about being proven wrong. I personally, I just started making videos like yesterday, so I didn't really get a chance to speak on it publicly. But within my personal circles, I didn't see this as an opportunity for us to get better. You feel me? When we made that move, I felt like we'd be better with complementary pieces because we already had we had a championship caliber 1, a championship caliber 2, and I don't know that you need a superstar player at the third best player on your team in order to have a championship, especially if you're paying them $40+ million. But everything that's going on right now, it's kind of making me think. Let me stop there. I went and I did watch other people. I watched other people's opinion, and I feel like the consensus among people who felt like this would work was, well, when you have that much talent on your team, you can't help but win. And outside opinions got me to the point where it was like, okay, well, maybe we can at least make it to the playoffs. And when you have LeBron, you've just seen it so consistently that he is able to win games. And then you have Anthony Davis next to him. And then Russell Westbrook, it just seems like it's not even necessarily a necessity. It's just like a cherry on the top, but he's still better than most NBA players. You feel me? But now that I'm watching how things transpire, and taking it in terms of like NBA history, how I've seen things develop, I don't know that I don't know that that was as much of a legitimate argument that we just have so much talent we should have expectations, especially championship expectations, just based off talent alone. So it made me think, do super teams even work? Like, I feel like over the course of NBA history, we think about a lot of teams retroactively as super teams. But as of late, super teams have been compiled differently than how they have been for the majority of NBA history. And I personally feel like it's not the best method of team building. See what I'm saying? One thing that was very uneasing to me as the Lakers season started was everybody was like, okay, we understand Russ and LeBron don't fit together, but if LeBron gets hurt, now we still have Anthony Davis and Russ on the court. And I feel like that thinking in its genesis was just flawed. You feel me? If we brought in LeBron James because he's the type of player that could deliver us a championship, which he has done, regardless of the circumstances, which I have my feelings on our bubble ring, but 17 is 17. Like, you can't take away the other 16 regardless. So LeBron James, he has proven the ability to do that in other places as well as where we are now. And we brought him in to win the championship. So for us to make a $40+ million move that only benefits us when he's not playing, I think that that's flawed thinking. Especially taking into consideration the fact that Anthony Davis is known. I don't want to say he's known for being injured, but we understand that he's injury prone. Like Data Davis. Data Davis is hilarious, but I have this man on my fantasy team, and I could tell you even before he was injured, before he got injured, he had only missed, I believe, 1 game all season. He was day to day for every single game going into the game. So now it's like we didn't even take into consideration the fact that we have this injury prone Anthony Davis, that if he's not playing, and then that means that it's not Russ and AD, it's Russ and LeBron, we're fucked, essentially. Like we should have never had expectations that Russ and LeBron on the court together would be able to play to the best of their abilities. And that made me think, in this new era of composing super teams, has that been effective enough for us to have even thought that making that move was, you feel me, going to be successful? Like, I think back to the super team that we tried to compose in the 2004 season. And I'm going to reference some other super teams as well, because this is not just a comparison of these two specific teams, but I do think that it's worth taking into consideration what occurred. You see what I'm saying? So we had superstars in their prime, and then we brought in some aging superstars that Karl Malone had never had any injury issues before. I don't believe Gary Payton had major injury issues before in the past, and it was inevitably Karl Malone's injury issues that really derailed us to a certain extent. Not to mention that Kobe had his whole case going on, and him and Shaq were, you feel me, at odds. So I'm not saying that these two teams are specifically the same, but just the idea of composing a super team. I feel like the major flaw in it is that the rest of your team has to suffer. See, when I think back to the teams that I like the most, they did have superstar caliber players, but also you could just go down the line and you can see players that may not necessarily be capable of carrying their own teams, but they play their roles very, very well. You see, you had Derek Fisher, plays his role phenomenal. You got Rick Fox, you feel me, plays his role phenomenal. You got, I'm drawing a blank right now. I'm drawing a blank for the rest of the team, but we know that the three-peat Lakers, they were a deep team, and I feel like you sacrifice that with super teams, and I don't believe that's the only problem. I think as well, when you have these superstar caliber players that are capable of carrying their own teams, there is a ceiling for how much of what you can bring to the table. So when you start having these players that could do so much all around what they can bring to the table compared to what they could bring to the table when they're next to each other, it's severely less. Because if you take Russell Westbrook this season, you put him on a team that doesn't have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, his problems don't seem as large because of what he brings to the table. It's lacking on the team. So thusly, his talent is maximized. And I feel like when you bring together these super teams, their talent isn't as maximized as what the player is. Like you lose the ability for your whole to be better than the sum of its parts. And I'm going down the line and I'm thinking about teams that have won championships and super teams, and the Nets also, I believe, are a major factor in this assessment that I have. The fact that both of these teams going into the season, it was like, who's going to win the championship out of the two of them? And now we don't believe either one of them will win the championship. And then you look at the teams that we do have as championship contenders, they're more well-rounded teams. And I feel like you sacrifice that when you put together these super teams. And when I look at super teams of the past, they were put together before the players were superstar players. So these players got to grow into maximizing their potential while together already. See what I'm saying? What Anthony Davis brings to the table when he is at his best, what LeBron James brings to the table when he's at his best, what Russell Westbrook brings to the table when he's at his best, you can't bring all of that to the table at the same time when it's one table. See what I'm saying? It's like a balanced meal. when you got your vegetables over here, you got your fruit, you got your grain, you got your meat and everything, it's maximized. But however, if you come to the table and you're like, all right, well, this aspect of the full course meal is more important, so I'm just going to overload my table with that, you don't have a well-balanced meal anymore. And then if you have aspects of your like health that are contingent upon the other pieces of a full balanced meal, then you're going to lack there. And inevitably the person who has a full balanced meal is going to come out healthier. And I feel like teams function in the exact same way. So I feel like when you have 3 superstar players in their prime that have become and built themselves up to be superstar players prior to coming together, you don't have the ability for them to grow into their best. So when we say what their best is, we can't really compare their best to what we expect them to bring to the table now, because it's not as much necessary. So now we got Russell Westbrook, who's clearly, you feel me, we'll say beef, and we're expecting him to bring to the table what vegetables and fruit to do. And it's like, well, we gave up vegetables and fruits in order to get them. And it's been making me think about it. I think back to I think in the cases where it has worked, the fit, it worked a lot better. Like, I feel like this common era of super teams, it really started with what the Boston Celtics did in 2008. But if you just look at it, you have Paul Pierce, who's a pretty ball dominant player. However, he could still shoot his open shots and he's going to control the ball. You have Kevin Garnett down low. Their skill sets, they don't overlap too much to the point to where KG can't bring the best of KG to the table while Paul Pierce is bringing the best of Paul Pierce to the table. And even in that, Ray Allen had to take a serious step back to the point to where we think he's just a shooter now, because that was the role that he brought to the championship teams that he won. But Ray Allen, I think it's hilarious if you go back and look at Ray Allen in his first 3-point shooting. I don't know if he participated in multiple, but in his first one, it was early in his career, you can hear the announcer say, oh, we're not used to seeing the slasher athletic type come into the 3-point, because he had so many other things in his repertoire that had to be essentially watered down for the Celtics to function, because what we needed you to bring to the table was shooting, and you just happened to at the time be the greatest in NBA history at that. So for you to take a step back, because Ray Allen wasn't the best Ray Allen. Ray Allen wasn't the best Ray Allen as he played with the Boston Celtics. The best Ray Allen was probably with the Bucks. If you want to say the Seattle Supersonics Ray Allen, it's one of those two. Nobody's going to say the best Ray Allen was with did I say the Bucks? I meant to say the Celtics. No, I did say the Celtics. The best Ray Allen, nobody's going to say it was the Ray Allen that came with the Celtics or the Ray Allen that came with the Miami Heat, even though those were the years that he won championships, because what he brought to the table wasn't as maximized on these teams that had so many other people to do what he was supposed to, what he did in his prime, what he brought to the table. So I look at that Celtics team, I look at the Miami Heat team, and a lot of people tried to compare Dwayne Wade and Russell Westbrook as, oh, well, LeBron James was capable of winning with Dwayne Wade, so he's also capable of winning with Russell Westbrook. That was a large part of the argument when people did bring up fit. But the reality of the situation is, first of all, the NBA it's a completely different game they're playing now. Spacing and all that type of stuff, the ability to shoot threes, the different types of offenses being ran. Like, I don't think the triangle offense would be as successful in today's NBA as it would be back then, because it was very post-centric. You see what I'm saying? Like the paint in the mid-range area, all of that stuff being tight, it wasn't as damning back then as it is now. However, nowadays, where you stretch things out, that's why mid-range shooting was such a larger deal, because that was the outskirts of where the space was. It was in the mid-range, whereas now we've pushed out to the 3-point line, so it's opened up the middle of the court. But the middle of the court, it wasn't back then. It wasn't designed to be as open as it is now. Not to mention that Dwayne Wade is just I don't want to say vastly superior player to Russell Westbrook, but for the things that he needs to bring to the table, if you are going to take away what you have to take away for LeBron James to be at his best, because if you have a team with LeBron James, he's a top 3 player all time, you're going to have him doing, it's like LeBron does what he does, and then we divvy out the rest of the responsibilities to the rest of the team. And the rest of those responsibilities, Dwayne Wade was just more capable the things Dwayne Wade did. Not to mention that there was a pedigree that Dwayne Wade brought to the table. Like I had never seen Russell Westbrook and LeBron James really bond prior to them being on the team together. Whereas there was a mental aspect of the fact that we knew that Dwayne Wade and LeBron James were very close. We like their relationship, similar to how we believed with KD and Kyrie. It is. They're like relationships of the players on the court. It matters, particularly in a sport like basketball, where each individual player or two players on a basketball court are going to it's going to hold more weight than most other team sports. Well, I'm speaking about football particularly when I say that, but like, you get what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? Like on a soccer team, you're not going to have one or two players that can dominate quite how one or two players can dominate the outcome of a game in basketball. And I just believe that when it comes to these super teams, you have to sacrifice too much if you're going to bring the teams together, when these players are already in their prime, that if fit, it has to matter more. Fit has to matter more than we really take into consideration. You can't just say, oh, we have talent. I think the Brooklyn Nets is another example of how super teams is not necessarily the best way that you need to be composing your teams, because there's unforeseen things like Kyrie's situation, or the fact that James Harden has been unhealthy, Kevin Durant. Like when you have these teams where it's like, all right, we're just going to focus all of our energy into this one aspect, like how I say in a full course meal, if we're going to focus all of our energy into meat. If you have somebody who's vegetarian, or for some reason that thing that you're putting all your focus into isn't there, is the connection that I'm making there, then you don't have anything anymore. You know what I'm saying? But I believe that's what's hurting these teams as you bring them together. It's almost like a glass cannon. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, it packs a huge punch, but the second there's any adversity that comes towards it, you're less able to handle it. Like I look at the teams that are successful now in the NBA, and you got the rise of the Memphis Grizzlies, and these players, they were in that system already as they developed into being these championship caliber players. So I think the Memphis Grizzlies, they're tough out for anybody. They could beat anybody in the league, so it's reasonable to consider them as a championship contender. You look at a team like the Bulls. They're not overly reliant on any particular parts. Like if I hear the Bulls won a game without their top two players, that's still reasonable because the roster was composed from top to bottom in order to be a successful roster together. So they can have more of a next man up mentality. Whereas when you lose a Kyrie Irving in Brooklyn, it's unreasonable for you to expect anybody else on your roster to be able to step up and take responsibility for what he is responsible for, or any one or two players, because it's so centric to Kyrie. You see what I'm saying? And those are just my thoughts on that. I don't think that it was ever fair for us to consider the Lakers to be a championship caliber team while knowing that they don't fit. And I feel like like I say, basketball being a sport where one or two players could change the outcome so much, we look at it best case scenario. Why the fuck does this sound keep coming? We look at it best case scenario. Like, okay, well, we have a sport where one or two players can change the outcome of the game more than any other sport. And we look at it, all right, well, we have the best one or two players. We don't take into consideration if anything happens to where they don't play well together, or for some reason they can't play. It has the same negative effect. You see what I'm saying? So now those same one or two players can change the outcome of a game completely negatively, to the point where it's like you can't expect to win any of these teams. And I understand that we made our Lakers team for some odd reason with the idea of LeBron James not playing coming into mind, but it's like, still, outside of Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook, we shouldn't have had expectations that the other three players on the court should be able to make up for it. And then the fact we considered so much LeBron getting hurt, which is like you have a guard and a big man, which you would think is a reasonable fit. You see what I'm saying? But the reality of the situation is, we just seen in Houston that Russ doesn't play well with big men. He plays better when he doesn't have a big man there. And it's like, just watching his game, you should be able to understand that that's the case and why that's the case. And it's like, I look at the other super teams that were composed together. The Golden State Warriors, when they brought in Kevin Durant, first of all, they already had an established culture, and the majority of the players that mattered on that team, they had grown together in order to fit. And then Kevin Durant was just such a perfect plug and play player. Like, if somebody says Kevin Durant is Harrison Barnes 10 times better, which Harrison Barnes fit in there until, the collapse in the finals that year. That's a reasonable assessment. That's a reasonable assessment to say that. So you're plugging in a player that does fit. But then you look at other super teams that have been tried to be composed, and it's like, a good example is, I keep thinking about the Lakers because that's who gets the majority of my attention. I can't lie. And for the last 20 years, that's who got the majority of my attention. But let's look at the 2013 Lakers. They started the season, somebody got hurt, and it was so damaging to them in a way that getting hurt wasn't. Like comparing them to, we'll say, the 2001 Lakers, where Kobe Bryant got hurt and they got better, and then Kobe seen where he fit in and was able to adjust his game when he came back. And I feel like that was a large step in them being what, in my opinion, is the most dominant team in NBA history. I think they're beating the 2017 Golden State Warriors. I think they're beating the 1996 Bulls. So I feel like when you have a situation where it's a roster that is composed from top to bottom, and then you have your superstar player and then another star caliber player next to him, because it's hard to win without that in the NBA, because you'll be competing against other teams that are also well balanced with at least that. You see what I'm saying? But if you just think about what we could have done with $44 million, we could have put so much around LeBron and AD, who that is enough of a championship core, to where I don't think there should have been expectations that we would be better when we relinquish that in exchange for another superstar player who can't bring the best of himself to the table. And I've already made a video slandering Russ, how I feel about Russ, but I think that maybe that's not even fair, because I said in that video, all right, Russ, we don't need you to average 25, 15, and 15, because I was so angry when I seen him say that. But the reality of the situation is, what I did say, hey, how about you average 2 turnovers, 3 turnovers per game? How about you shoot this percent from the week? That's never been him. So now we're bringing beef to the table and expecting it to behave like vegetables. But those are just my thoughts on this. If you have separate thoughts, if you want to drop a dislike because you disagree with what I said, by all means, just leave a comment, argue. Let me know what is wrong with my assessment of this personally.
The microphone is my mistress, I head out, I'm just venting. Fix your mouth like a dentist and you get stopped like a sentence. These niggas pouting and bitching, I'm just counting my binge.